you think that like some of the biggest mistakes are that guys make when it comes to like trying to hunt feed trees?
Yeah, probably. I would say it's just hunting the ones that are we talked about earlier, dropping and nothing's feeding on it, or hunting ones with old sign. Because I mean, most people can understand you can find a tree that's mulched up under it, but you find one that was hot last week and the deer are already kind of moving away from it. It might be if it's not that hot tree, yeah, a couple does might come check it out and they might find one or two.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're not hanging out there for a long time, that buck that's searching or coming in after the does, I think a lot of times they're not necessarily searching, but they're letting the does go feed first, and they know that they can come pick up on these trees that are safe after them. Because literally almost everyone's been after other deer have been to the tree. So I think that's probably the biggest mistakes is just hunting the old sign and then hunting where there's not sign. There's a lot of feed.
Yeah, and you bring up the whole thing, and you mentioned this earlier, but the whole aspect of, people hunting trees that have a lot of acorns on the ground, but there's no feed sign.
Yeah.
And you see that on Facebook all the time. And
Oh yeah.
again, being guilty of it too, where like guys are like, "Man, I'm in this spot. There's acorns everywhere." And the funny thing is, a lot of those people are hunting around mountain oaks, mountain chestnut oaks,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
which where we turkey hunted, there's a bunch of those.
Yeah.
And they drop that bit. They look like a water chestnut oak,
You
like a
could
white oak.
bang someone on the head with
Oh,
one.
dude, when they're following the tree, you need a hard hat.
Yeah.
But very rarely we find feed sign underneath them. But some people that are like new to that kind of area where those trees are at, they find that and they're like, "This is the honey hole,"
Yeah.
but they don't realize everything within 1,000 yards of them it looks the same. Like
Yep.
they're all
There's
dropping.
millions of them.
They're all dropping super heavy.
Sounds like someone dropping a ball bearing out of a tree.
yeah. Ding! Yeah, it is funny when it hit. Oh my god, it's so funny when it hits like a rock or something.
Or a limb, dude. It sounds like a
20
baseball bat.
like a 22.
Yeah, I mean it's
cracking.
super loud.
It's like when we hunted Georgia last year, that's what we ran into. And the funny thing is, because the white oaks weren't dropping quite yet, red oaks definitely weren't dropping. There was a few white oaks every now and then that you find some green acorns under, but there was some mountain oaks you would find, and the deer were actually feeding on them. You'd find some really good feeds on them. We actually witnessed, some young bucks and does specifically feeding on them. So that was like the first time I've seen that. But from guys I've talked to, it's only in the situation when there's nothing else dropping. The season opens so early that's like the only option they want or they have really outside of soft mass like your muscadines and your persimmons or some kind of browse. And as soon as those whites start dropping, or maybe even red, they just shift off that pattern and they're off to something else. Because I think, have you seen mountain oaks fed heavily before?
I mean,
that
a
situation?
little bit, and like from time to time. But in that spot, that was a spot where it was like a transitional area. They were eating them, and there was some pretty good feed sign there, but they weren't staying for long. Like every deer that we saw that came up and actually ate in that spot, they were there for max 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they were all coming out pretty close to dark, and then they were dropping off the hill and going down. There was like some pastures and stuff. I think they were just going and eating greens, whatever, like grass and browse around those like grown up fields and pastures. And that was just I don't know, a little snack along the way, I guess.
Yeah.
That is something when I've looked back hunting early season in Alabama, there's areas I've hunted that I would find that. And again, I'd set up and very rarely see a deer. But one time I sat up and I found where those mountain oaks are at, there was 3 gigantic American white oaks. And they were dropping. That, looking back at it, it was a pretty good feed sign. We set up, it was me and my brother on a morning hunt. We were walking in and I'd found it the afternoon before. I was like, dude, we're going to go hunt this spot. And this is like first year hunting public. This is like maybe 10 years ago. He sat in one tree and we sat like 40 yards from each other. We're like, oh, you sit on this tree, I'll sit on that tree, whatever. Had a big drainage ditch coming around us. And we ended up having a bachelor group of bucks come through. Had one really nice 8-point come in, actually underneath him, but he was facing the wrong direction. And he heard it walking, and he could see me, and I was like making hand signals, buck, antlers below you. And he looked down, there was a really nice buck kind of milling around, and ended up he spooked it trying to get up to get a shot. But when that buck was out, there was across the ditch from us, there were some more white oaks, and out of a pine thicket came, I think it was 3 or 4 other like nice bucks, like 2 small bucks and then one like really nice buck had come out, and they were feeding on that hillside. And then what happened was when we spooked this deer ran across the ditch. The other deer didn't know what happened. He never blew or anything. He just caught movement and just took off running. And then they all got over there, started sparring, kind of fighting a little bit and feeding around. And it kind of brings up a question that I hear from a lot of guys that hunt early season, bow season in the South about bachelor groups in areas. Like, have you had much experience hunting, like catching bachelor groups coming in? And if so, like, was there any specific sign that they were leaving? Like, kind of going back to some of that sign that kind of keyed you in on that.
Yeah. So the only thing for that would be it's starting to get later in the season or later into October when the white oaks are really good. So you might see some of that stuff on the red oaks. The only thing I can say is a lot of times we'll put a camera not necessarily on the tree, but if there's a scrape around. So yeah, that's the only way to really key in on that is if you've got a camera or something like that.
To know what's actually coming.
Know what's there, and we've had success having cameras actually. So when I was telling you about the 3 that me and my buddy killed, like basically I killed one, he killed one, and then I killed another like within a week and a half of each other. We had a camera down there, and after he killed his buck, we got the camera, drove all the way home. It was 2 hours home, checked the camera, and I was like, well, I know where I need to be in the morning. I had to drive all the way back down there because we thought we'd killed them all. You know, this was an area, and this kind of goes back to the question you asked me about if there's a few white oaks like 40, 50 yards apart. A lot of times the best way is just to tag team that. We could almost see each other. We're probably 150 yards apart, but like when you get in the tree, you know, you kind of see little spots. Where we killed those bucks, we could almost see each other when we climbed in the tree. So 150 yards or so in a heavy canopy. So that's your best option for that.
How high do you like to climb when you're hunting features?
I like to be at least 30 feet. I know a lot of people hate that. I like to be 30, 35, 40 feet. And so you ready to get a little bit technical?
Just do it.
Or entertain my technical, what I have to say about this. So, all right. So imagine and I'm not using this as an excuse. I like to be high enough so where they don't see movement and hope that my scent is blowing away instead of being right there on the ground all afternoon or morning. All right, so if you're standing on the ground and here's the deer broadside, and you were to shoot your bow at it, that deer is going to drop. So it's going to drop perpendicular to your arrow in your frame of reference. Well, if you're up here, the higher you are, now let's exaggerate that. Let's get directly on top of the deer. Not that anyone needs to be shooting a deer directly under them because I've done it plenty of times and it doesn't work out well. If that deer drops, where is it dropping in your frame of reference for it?
I mean, just straight
down. So it's not like its vitals are moving in the way your arrow. So the higher you are, yeah, people talk about that shot angle and having less to shoot at, but you also have less that deer is moving out of the plane or the vector that your arrow is. So that's one way I look at it. Maybe I'm just trying to justify being higher in the tree.
It's that engineer talk.
But I don't. That's what I'm just trying to use that as saying I don't see it as a disadvantage to have a steep shot angle, aside from being right above them to where you can't hit them in both lungs because they're out of plane of each other.
Well, we've met a listener. Funny you said that about that shot plane. Yeah, it's like it's a smaller diameter, kind of like what you're trying to put the arrow through. But if that deer shifts, I kind of see what you're saying. Yep. He's shooting. He had a video. He's one sticking. Okay, climbing 80 feet up.
Yeah.
Bow hunting, and he had video of him shooting deer doing that. And at first, I thought he was I thought he was lying, whatever. And he showed a video hunting like pines. Now he's just hunting pines. There's no feed trees, catching bucks coming through. You know, these big pines. And he's shooting down, and it is like, and he's shooting a heavy arrow, you know, really heavy, super sharp fixed blade, and he's just burying that thing through their shoulders, and just, I mean, pinning that deer. The deer, you know, runs 90 yards and just tips over. But he was just like, specifically, he climbed that high so he could shoot down through gaps in the canopy because he'd be like out in these big longleaf pine savannas where there's other like smaller, like 20-foot pine trees around.
There's like a secondary canopy.
Yeah, it's like, and he's getting up above that in these giant longleafs, climbing, I mean, up to the canopy, like where these first big limbs are, you know, 70, 80 feet up, and just shooting straight down through these holes in the 20-foot pines. That if you were 30 feet up, you'd just be looking into a bunch of pines. You can't see anything. But when he get up real high, he filmed and he showed like what it looked like up there and shooting down. I'm like, that's crazy. But also, I'm just thinking like the lag time of that arrow coming from 80 feet up.
Right.
Even if that deer's at 30, 40 yards, the lag time it's got to take to get there. I don't care how fast your arrow is. Get a heavy arrow, gravity's working for you. Shooting down like that. But I'm like, that's insane, man. So I'm interested, by the way, to see what kind of comments we get, you know, about that. Talking about get a little higher, you know, kind of shooting down on them.
And I think the actual main reason, though, is so when you're hunting a feed tree, you're not just hunting a deer that's walking by. You're not hunting a deer that you're going to see for 15 seconds. You're not hunting a rutting buck that's chasing a doe that you're going to see for 15 seconds. The deer, there's going to be most likely you're going to see some does before that big buck comes in, and they might hang out for an hour. I don't really want to be where they can just look up and see me for an hour. There's a lot of time that you just want to be still, let them feed around without knowing you're there.
Okay.
And that's really the main reason, aside from the scent and all that. But,
Yeah.
That was one of my problems when we started going to lock-on setups. You get 4 sticks high, when it was easier to carry than a climber and you could get in weirder trees, but you get 4 sticks high and you're like 18 feet
Yeah.
and you're just so exposed that you can sit there and be as still as you want, but if they're around you for an hour, eventually one of them is probably going to notice you.
By the way, what other points are like important? I don't know what other notes you have written down specifically on this topic, but I am interested in seeing like what are we missing when it comes to the strategy going into feed tree hunting and what people should be planning for before season gets here for that.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, you can go start identifying the areas with someone that's never done it before, doesn't have an inventory of places. You can go start looking for areas that just have a higher density of white oaks because it's going to be your best starting point. On years that, and you can already start now knowing if there's going to be a lot of acres for this year. Then you might want to avoid those areas that have a lot of white oaks first. Start on the areas that just have a few scattered if you know it's a year that's got a lot. A year that doesn't have a lot, you might want to start on the areas that has more trees to give you more options. So that'd be a good starting point for someone that's never hunted them before. But make sure that if you're in the southeast, you're in the woods, middle of October, late October, looking, listening, just try to find those trees, give them some sits, and you should have some success there.
Okay.
A lot of times, like I said, it takes a few sets to see. Maybe go in the woods and decide that you're going to shoot a doe. Get some practice hunting the feed trees, knowing what to do, but pay attention and realize they're going to hang out for a while. Take your time, make a good shot.
Okay.
This is my last question. I'm real curious about this. So you start hunting them early season. How I asked about how long a feed tree lasts, but how long in general are you hunting feed trees for? Is it a all season long thing and you're cycling into, water oaks later in the season or red oaks or something like that? Or is there a time where it kind of phases out and you're on to something else?
Yeah, it phases out. It revolves around the white oak drop. If I find a tree later in the season, a water oak or something like that, then that's great. But as far as how long you're hardcore feed tree hunting, it's probably a month.
Okay.
So maybe middle or late September is really when it gets started good to late October. You can find some trees early September, but they really start cranking it up middle of September through the end of October. So
Okay.
I guess 6 weeks maybe.